Oh, yes, you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Is that fine? Okay. All right. You guys have been here for a long time. I hope that confusing you and depressing you a little bit at the end of the day is okay. So, we spent the day talking about a lot of specific solutions, about specific business plans, about ideas, things that are very micro level, very concrete. I want us to zoom up a little bit, take a few steps, not back, up, and think a little bit of why are we doing this? Why does it even matter? Who cares about refugees actually? Why is this even something we're talking about? And why do some of us take that title of a refugee and others don't? Who made that decision? And yeah, so just take a couple of minutes to really think about that. I looked up the word refuge not refugee, refuge, in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and I'm going to read this just to also avoid plagiarism. I'm going to literally read the two definitions that came up. Refuge is a place that provides shelter or protection, or it's something to which one has recourse in difficulty. So basically, refuge is a person, a place, something, someone, whatever it is that we go to when we're in distress, when we want to feel accepted, when we want to feel reassured, and more importantly, when we want to feel safe. And indeed, this is something every one of us, every single human being needs as a basic need for human survival. So looking at this psychological model, this is actually this is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, developed starting in the 1940s by Abraham Maslow. This model has been refined over the next years. Now it has more layers on top, but the basic layers have not really changed. So for a human being, any human being, to survive, the very, very basic thing that needs to be fulfilled is physiological needs. We all need to eat, drink, poop, get warm. But right about that, we need safety. And safety is actually the main driver, the main motivator for most of human behavior that is not directly to fulfill physiological needs. So most of our non-physiologically oriented, so things that we don't do to satisfy this base of the pyramid here, are things that we largely do because they are important to enhance our safety. Examples, pretty much everything. We get in relationships with people that make us feel safer. We have children because we think that, well, we have them for many reasons, but many of us do because we feel safer leaving something behind in the world. We kill other people because it makes us feel like we're defending our own little communities and homelands from people who are jeopardizing our safety. We build walls because we think people who are less familiar are also less safe. This is pretty natural, by the way, and so we think maybe it's better to not let them in the first place, so we feel safer. We pray to another power, to a higher power that we think might give us justice in a parallel universe, different dimension, in the afterlife, whatever we want to call it, because that makes us feel safe that we're at least going to be compensated for some of the unfairness we're facing in the world now. Some of us feel safer getting more money, getting education. So if we're all principally driven by seeking safety, we're all going for refuge constantly, on a psychological level, that makes us all refugees. But of course, that's not how politics works. If we're talking about it as an official term, a refugee has to be someone who physically changed their physical location in order to enhance their feeling of safety, and not just someone who is doing that in their place of residence without any physical shift of location. That's really the main difference between the political and the psychological level. I'm simplifying, I know, but again, I'm zooming up a little bit. And I like to philosophize, So, why does this matter? We are right now in a situation, in entering a century, where our safety, all of us, no exception, is being jeopardized in ways we never knew before. So, what will happen in the next few decades when big parts of the world will be suffering from droughts and unprecedented natural disasters because of climate change? What will happen to the people living in those places that are mostly affected? They might need to also physically move somewhere else. What will happen when AI takes over a lot of the jobs in the future and enhances and contributes to exacerbating economic inequality? Of course, we can argue technology has been taking human jobs but also providing human jobs for many, many years now. But technology was never actually threatening somehow to take over certain tasks, certain cognitive abilities that so far only humans were able to do. So I'm not predicting an AI apocalypse, I'm just predicting one possible scenario. What will happen when some people, because of advances in technology, not just become unemployed, but become unemployable? Like, simply, they become economically useless. There's really just nothing that you can do that can make you economically more powerful. Where would you go then? So, this, of course, would be much easier to handle if there were less of us living on this earth, but we are a lot of people. There was a UN report I actually read just yesterday, it's very recently released, that there is a prediction that the population size over the next generations, over the next decades will decrease. Women are having less children. Yes. But we're still too many right now. And so this is still something not to underestimate. So that means that what we have been calling a refugee or a migration crisis over the last few years, mainly starting in 2015, this might be just really the tip of the iceberg for the 21st century. We're just starting. So, and actually the OECD released a report last year that estimates 3.3 billion human beings to be living in fragile countries by 2050. That means 3.3 billion human beings will be living in countries where governments are unable or unwilling to provide basic services for most of their citizens. That's 3.3 billion people. Let that number sink in for 2 seconds. I told you I'm going to depress you at the end of the day. I wasn't lying. So I guess we're going to see more people on rubber boats, more children detained at borders and separated from families. Maybe governments will have more sense in their heads in the next years. Not too optimistic, but maybe. But what we call refuge or migration crises is something that is much closer to us than we think it is. And that means a lot of us. At some point, most of us will at least have a personal connection with someone who is threatened to lose their safety by staying in their area of residence. So, we clearly need new approaches. I'm somehow preaching to the crowd because most of us here are people who are at least thinking of long-term solutions, thinking of new approaches, thinking of innovative paths of innovative approaches, solutions, pathways. But let's not forget for a second that the rest of the world, most human beings still define, give themselves a pat on the shoulder if they give some bit of money to some homeless person or help satisfy what we just showed as the very basic physiological needs of human beings. This is what most of us still do as our main act of altruism. This is what we feel is what contributes most to the well-being of others. But most of us still very much forget everything else that comes after that. And the ones of us that do, like, people sitting in this room, for example, who are working at least on this level, working on economic safety, for example, I think we're at least steps ahead, good for us. But we still need to be careful not to put the burden of solving problems of the unprivileged people on the unprivileged people themselves. So we are talking a lot about empowering refugees or migrants, of course using political terminology, to find solutions for themselves, to empower themselves economically, to start their own businesses. If we're talking about that about starting businesses that are replicative, I'm using William Baumol's economic theory. Well, he has a lot of theories, but there's a distinction between replicative and innovative entrepreneurship. They're both important, but serve very different purposes. So if we're talking about, we're enhancing replicative entrepreneurship, basically shop owners, people who are starting businesses that are already widely available in the market, not producing new products or services. Sure, that's important. That combats poverty. That provides job opportunities. That can help people feel better about being more independent, reduce dependence on welfare. It has its benefits. If we're talking about enhancing innovative entrepreneurship, also important. We are talking about finding new ideas to solve problems, about changing existing market structures, about reaching out to new markets, about maybe finding novel solutions to problems that are facing the refugees themselves, because they are more experts in that, so maybe they can provide products or services that no one else can think about. So this is all great. And actually, this is a result of my own research. I did a study on Syrians who are planning to start their businesses in Berlin. And so they are people who, by the German government's definition, people with a refugee status in Germany. And I studied different types of motivation, so I was looking at many different variables that can contribute to their motivation to start their businesses. And I was looking both at replicative and innovative kinds of businesses. And interestingly, maybe even surprisingly, most of them were very driven, like the majority of the motivation consisted of things like wanting to improve myself. I have passion for what I work. I would like to achieve something. I feel that I have talent I want to use. I feel that I'm creative enough to want to pursue this kind of opportunity. And this all falls under the category of intrinsic motivation. So this is good news. Intrinsic motivation, if we look at, for example, the self-determination theory in psychology that distinguishes intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, intrinsic motivation is much more likely to be associated with positive outcomes, higher performance, higher well-being. But this is the result of another project, another research that I conducted. Even the most intrinsically autonomously driven people can be demotivated when they have a hurdle, a mountain of hurdles facing them. You can be very motivated to start a business, for example. This is a very micro-level example, start a business. But then you're faced by, you feel discriminated against, you feel that you have access to just very few market opportunities and you can't really operate in the sector that you're trained in. You feel that, we talked a lot today about you can't access finance. You don't have knowledge and skills that fit in this new market that you're in. I mean, you can be as motivated as you want, but the burden is still on you mostly to keep on using that motivation and drive yourself forward because the system doesn't support that. So we still very largely put the burden of finding long-term sustainable solutions on those who are least empowered to actually do so. So let's assume we're very smart people. We were able someday to actually provide great systematic support to solve such problems. Let's assume theoretically we find the best financial solutions, we enhance access to markets, we're able to find equivalencies for the foreign degrees easily. Let's assume we do all that. How are we expected to solve migration, refugee, whatever we want to call them, crises in our home countries, while we are actually also fueling those crises somewhere else? So, for example, this is also very human. I'm not blaming us in particular. We only really see the magnitude of problems when they come knocking at our doors and they become very close and personal. We don't really see what's happening when it's far away. It doesn't really concern us, right? Sure. So, countries like the US, Germany, France, the UK, and Italy, which are countries that have been very high on debates related to migration and refugees over the last years. These are among the top 10 countries in the world that actually account for 90% of the global arms industry. So, the US, the UK just signed a deal, a new deal with Saudi Arabia a few days ago, for example. So, on the one hand, we are helping refugees coming to our hometowns. But on the other hand, let's sell weapons there. That's good for our economy. So what? We're going to have more refugees because of that? Just coming and coming. So, exhibit A right here. I left Iraq. Where did I go to get my refugee status? United States of America. So, another example. A bit of a, maybe less directly brutal sounding one, but just as brutal, maybe even more. CO2 emissions in the world. The 3 least regions in the world contributing to climate change and CO2 emissions are actually 3 regions that export some of the largest numbers of refugees globally. So, Africa as a whole continent has the lowest amount of CO2 emissions in the world. Where do most refugees come from? By the way, the number here for the Middle East, this is only a bit skewed up because of the Gulf countries, because of the oil and gas industry there. So if we're also contributing to environmental damage all over the world, especially in countries that are highly fragile and already suffering, and then people from those countries come here, knocking their doors to have a safer life. We need to think a little bit, about that as well. So, are you depressed enough? Great, then I'm doing my job correctly. What can we do? I'm going to try to sound a little bit more optimistic. What we really need to focus on is that as human beings, we actually generally all have the same intentions, even though we have very different strategies. Again, we are all driven by our desire for safety. An Alabama truck driver who votes for Donald Trump has the same desire for safety as a left-wing hippie vegan person living in Berlin. In the end, we are all seeking safety. This is our main intention. Most of us are not really trying to be assholes. Some of us are, but most of us are actually not. This is not in their intention, but that's how the actions actually translate a lot of the times. Because we unintentionally end up hurting a good amount of people in our own desires for safety. But maybe if we actually develop enough empathy to really understand that the person in front of me is not trying to cause pain, is not trying to steal my job, is not a complete racist, is not whatever label we want to give that person, and that person just needs as much safety as I am. Maybe then we will be able to develop more strategies together. And humans are amazing at that. The human brain, we just need to plug our brains to each other's brains a bit and be able to connect to each other at a higher level, more often and more deeply. But humans are the only animals that are able, and I'm quoting Yuval Noah Harari here, they are the only animals that are able to collaborate flexibly in very large numbers. So we're not just able to collaborate in very large numbers, bees can do that as well, but we also do it very flexibly. We are extremely adaptable. We are the ones who created the human empire that exists right now. We can do a lot. So maybe if we just focus a bit on understanding each other at a deeper level, at a higher level, and reflect a bit more often about why are we doing the things we do? Who are we trying to help? Am I trying to start a refugee? Am I trying to help a refugee to start a business for the refugee? Or is it for my own safety so this person doesn't steal my job later? Or is it because there's funding available and I want to get advantage of that? Let's just think a bit of why we do the things we do and think at a higher level of what makes us similar rather than what makes us very different. I could end there, but I just like this little guy in the middle. So just the last thing I would like to add is, what's very important to get any of this done is really to work towards our own internal balance. If we cannot work on our own balance, on our own reflection, we can never build empathy for other people, because we have no empathy for ourselves. And then we can also ultimately not be able to adapt as much as we need to, especially in a world where changes are happening way too much, way too fast, in a speed that most of us cannot catch up to. So, working on our own internal balance, ultimately leading to higher empathy, higher to collective brain power, and maybe we can change those future possible apocalyptic scenarios into much more positive ones. Thank you.